Good morning, YouTube, BookTube. This is Johnny. Thought I'd make a video since I'm alone here in Southwest Michigan. It is now March the 15th. It's the middle of the month. It's 6:46 in the morning. I woke up and I realized afresh that I am alone here in the hermit hut. The hermit hut is situated, built in the middle of the wasteland. So yeah, as I've been saying, my wife is out in Denver, Colorado, visiting our daughter Bethany, who's going to be like in her 40s in June of this year. She has 4 children. She has Louisa, who has a birthday today. And then there's Margaret, Jack, and little Nora Jean. And she's married to Andy, who's an engineer who works at home, start working at home during the COVID plague. So she called last night about 9:30 our time. It was 7:30 there, and she was going to bed. It's snowing in Denver. So she said, I can't see in the mountains. She always liked going to Denver and seeing the mountains and going someplace, but everything's shut down due to the snowstorm. So she's, and the schools are closed. So all day long she has to deal with kids who want constant attention. So she called, we had time to talk. I told her about how I went through my CD collection and took down the extreme music and brought up the more relaxed kind of music due to the buzzing in my ear, the tinnitus. And yeah, last night I listened to some C and Cake, thinking about maybe buying some more of the music, kind of chamber pop, elegant chamber pop. So I got up at 6, couldn't lay in bed, came up here, made a fresh pot of coffee, and wrote my diary. I'm on page 239 for the year 2024. And I thought this would be a Friday reads. What am I going to read on Friday? I do have still over there on the table those stack of used books from thrift stores that I will show. I got plenty of time, but maybe to later on. Well, today, I went through my CDs yesterday and I showed you the video, but I also went through my books. And I'm taking 5 boxes of books. I made an appointment at Blue Stockings Bookshop to take them there around 11 o'clock this morning for in-store credit. Most of it was just non-fiction, history, and I went through the lower level down the storage room where a lot of books are and try to put things in order, make some space so I could walk around there down in the lower level, back in the storage room where the books are stored in bookcases, and well, you've seen the videos. So I'll do that today. Maybe I'll find something at Blue Stockings to buy. I visited all of the thrift stores in North Holland, so there's nowhere to go to look at used books. So I'll go to Blue Stockings at 11 a.m. It's not far from where we live, maybe about 10 minutes. It's supposed to be a sunny day. It was it rained and drizzled and was gray and ugly yesterday. So yeah, I went through my books. Yeah, when you have a lot of non-fiction history books, it's kind of hard which ones to get rid of and which ones you want, because you're never I'm not going to read them. I mean, that's the point. A lot of history books I collect just for reference if I want to look something up. So I don't know why I keep them, but I like all kinds of books. I like books on history, European history, especially United States history, church history, Eastern Europe. I'm not really into China or Japan or Asian history. I have some books, but most of it's European, United States. I like biographies, as you all know. I have more. I like, in my library thing, where I catalog books, most of the books I really like are fiction. I like fiction. And then I like nonfiction. But then I like, most of what I read is Christian literature. Because, hey, you know, I'm a Christian, I'm going to die, and my desire is to be in heaven with the elect and the elect angels, worshiping the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit throughout eternity. But, okay, this is Friday Reads. What am I going to read Friday? Well, I don't know if I told you that I read through the Carthusian Spirituality. What I do sometimes in my live journal, Crooked Fingers, it has an archive going back to the first entry back in March 2001. And what I'll do sometimes at night, this is like yesterday was March the 14th, 2024. Well, I'll go back, click on archives, and find out what I was doing or reading back in March the 14th in the year 2012, or March the 14th in the year 2003. That's when I was back. I stopped working in June of 2007. Now, I didn't start. I started working at the Farm Bureau, the Egg Division, the Hamilton Farm Co-op Egg Division back in the 90s. I should have my timeline here, but I don't have it. And I worked there for about 15 years. But there was a time when I was working at the Egg Division in 2001 that I was laid off for 4 or 5 months. And maybe they had a slowdown. So I didn't work. I was called back to work eventually. But during that time, I found out about LiveJournal. And that's when I started writing in LiveJournal, Crooked Fingers. So I don't have recorded all of my personal history. Now, I told you I have diaries from 1978 to March the 15th, 2024, but they're all in boxes and it's very difficult to get to them, and plus, who really cares? So it would be kind of interesting to find out what was I doing on March the 14th, 1985, or what was I doing on March the 15th in 1980, but I don't have the desire to dig them up, whereas in Crooked Fingers they're all there on my computer or stored and maybe in some place, I don't know where they're stored. But so but the point of this whole ramble is, it's going on 10 minutes, that I noticed that I always read around the beginning of the year. I read the Carthusian Spirituality, the writings of Hugh Obama and Gaio DuPont. And so I got it out and I read this volume. I told you I'm kind of out of it. I can't really, I get kind of stuffed. I get indigestion. I read so much that I can't focus. But this I can read the Carthusian Spirituality and I can just meditate, contemplate, ponder. I can just think about it. And I read through this volume. It says here in the 14th, it says here in the back, in the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries, the Carthusians filled the role played in the 10th and 11th centuries by the Cluniac network, in the 12th century by the Cistercians, and in the 13th century by the Franciscans and Dominicans. Western Christendom's most outstanding professional intercessors before God's throne. Founded in the late 11th century, a few years before the Cistercians, the Carthusians grew very slowly during the first 2 centuries, but were highly respected from the beginning. The 2 authors whose writings make up this volume are situated at the end of the 13th century, just before the order's flourishing growth of the 14th century. This mysterious author, known as Hugh Obama, may have influenced the 14th century Cloud of Unknowing. Now, Cloud of Unknowing is one of my favorite spiritual writings, but it's no one knows who wrote it. It's author unknown, the Cloud of Unknowing. Certainly had a great impact on Catholic spirituality in the 16th and following centuries, especially, but not exclusively, in Spain. Now, I mentioned St. John of the Cross. St. John of the Cross at one time thought about becoming a Carthusian, but then he went into the Carmelite. And so after I read the Carthusian Spirituality, I thought what I would do for my Friday reads is start reading again the St. John of the Cross. And I probably will read, I think the last time I read, in the collected works of St. John of the Cross, you have his, this is translated by Kieran, Kavanaugh, and Otilio Rodriguez. But in the collected works, you have you have the Ascent of Mount Carmel, and then you have, which that's what I'm going to read. I've read the Dark Knight. I think last time I was reading through the collected works. Yeah. The Dark Knight is a very short one. You can read it in probably a week. The Dark Knight. And then you use that expression, a dark night. And then you have the Spiritual Canonical, which I've read. Well, I've read through this. I've read St. John of the Cross for 50 years. It's one of the first things I read when I became a Christian back in 1970. And I showed you my old paperback editions of different, like the Spiritual Canonical, the Dark Knight, the Ascent of Mount Carmel. And then in here is the living flame of love. But what I'm going to do, as far as Friday reads, this morning I'm going to start reading the Ascent of Mount Carmel. And the Ascent of Mount Carmel. That's what I'm going to start reading for Friday reads. Because I read through the Carthusians. You have Hugh Obama, his treatise, The Roads of Zion, Mourn, and then you have Guyot Dupont on Contemplation, and I read this. So I'm going to start reading for Friday reads through the rest of this month, the the works of St. John of the Cross. I always do it around the first of the year, and then I've been reading the Transfiguration of Christ, Exegetical, Theological reading. Now, I'm not reading through the Gospel of Luke this morning because my wife is gone and I don't want to read ahead of her. So we'll start reading the Gospel of Luke when she gets back next week from visiting our daughter and her family. So I'm trying to avoid reading the Gospel of Luke until my wife is back, because that's what we read when we have devotions together. Now, as far as what I'm going to be reading, Friday reads, today, the weekend, I've been reading the Diaries of Don Powell, 1931 to 1969, edited by Tim Page. I read this last night. And I'm also reading Don Powell, a biography by Tim Page. And then I also have been reading The Fall of America, Poems in These States, 1965, 1971, by Allen Ginsberg. And reading Allen Ginsberg, Fall of American Journals, 1965, 1971. And then I kind of been reading this kind of speculative fiction. This is Jonathan Lethem, The Arrest, a dystopia novel. I'm almost halfway through this. And then I've been reading for like nonfiction. The Freaks came out to write Definitive History of the Village Voice, the radical paper that changed American culture, by Tricia, Romano. So yeah, I don't know. The other day I told my wife, it says, The Village Voice, the radical paper that changed American culture. I would say, well, the Village Voice, maybe it changed people's culture there in New York City, but I think magazines like the Rolling Stones magazine, Playboy, it all depends. I mean, I don't know how many people in American culture has ever read the Village Voice, but I would say more people have read the Rolling Stones magazine or early Playboy magazine, which had good reporting, good writers. Yeah, it's one thing about, like when I'm watching the news, we watch PBS News, and it's very insightful news, and you know it's slanted to a more progressive, what people would call a liberal perspective. But how many people watch PBS? I mean, I'm sure there are people who watch Fox News more than PBS. And so, I mean, the point, what culture is what American culture was changed by reading the Village Voice newspaper there in New York City back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I'm not sure, it's not really in circulation now. So what changes culture? And what culture is that? Youth culture, old man culture, middle class culture, corporate culture, drug culture? I mean, what changes people's consciousness or state of awareness? I know books have really changed my consciousness. Ginsberg believed that what we really needed was a change of consciousness. That's why he advocated drugs, psychedelics. Well, if you read the life of Ginsberg, he wasn't really heavy into drugs. Maybe in his earlier days, but I don't know if he really even took that much drugs as he got older. Maybe he smoked a joint, but I don't really know. But he believed maybe through meditation, Eastern religions, Because Ginsberg, even though he was not a Christian, he was a very religious person. I mean, if you read the life of Ginsberg, he didn't have any material possessions. He wasn't into money. He wasn't into material things. He basically supported a lot of people through his life. I mean, he gave a lot of money away and time. And as I've been thinking about Ginsberg, I think he was a poet. That's what he was, and that's what was important to him, was poetry. And being among poets and writers, and practicing his Eastern religion. And so anyway, so I'm reading Don Powell's Diaries. You know, she wasn't a very, you probably never heard of her, but she wrote 15 novels. She wrote plays. She wrote thousands of letters. She was very prolific in spite of, she was an alcoholic. She had an alcoholic husband. She had a lot of personal tragedies, but she was always writing, and that's what I admire about her. So yeah, I'm reading her biography. That's my Friday reads, drinking coffee, writing in my diary, which I always do, morning, afternoon, evening, night. I'm always writing because that's what I am. And that's what I admire of writers who write. They just don't put one novel out, or they're always writing. They're always, that's their life. And that's what I always liked about Ginsberg. He was always being a poet. He was a poet. That's what he was. That was his calling in life. And I never really had a calling in life. Like I told you, I just wanted to be a minister of the gospel. I just wanted to tell people about Jesus. I wanted to be a man of the Word of God. I just wanted to tell people to teach and preach the Bible. I didn't want any material things. I always tell Carol, what we have here in Holland, Michigan, in the Hermit Hut, it's because of her. My wife was a professional nurse for over 46 years. Now I worked, I always had jobs, you know, janitorial jobs. I worked in like an egg division, loading eggs into an egg processing machine. I was an office manager. When I was in seminary, I worked on the grounds, mowing lawns, trimming bushes, painting houses. One summer I worked at Heinz, stuffing pickles in a jar. I worked and I've done all kinds of odd jobs over the years, and so yeah, I never really wanted material things, a house, car. I just basically wanted to spend my life telling people about Jesus. And it never happened. And now I'm going to be 72 years old in August 2024, and I'm just waiting to go to heaven. Anyway, this is my Friday reads. Hope you had a good reading week. Have a good reading weekend. Like I said, I'm going to Blue Stocking Bookshop today, and I'll read, I'll write, I'll pray, and seek to live for the glory of God. So once again, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your comments. So yeah, this morning I'll start reading Ascent to Mount Carmel. I finished reading Carthusian Spirituality, and read this book of the Transfiguration of Christ, and Exegetical and Theological reading. I did order another Christian book last night that's supposed to come tomorrow on hermeneutics, biblical interpretation. I'll show that. So I'll sign off. May the Lord bless. Until next time, bye.